you're going. But yeah, just to introduce you to myself, this is the first time I will be doing a podcast where I've not spoken to the person prior to having them onto the podcast. So, and then it's quite a big honor. It's wanted to ask you, when was the last time you spoke to someone and you were actually slightly anxious or nervous or slightly stressed talking to them? Because that's what I experienced tonight coming into this podcast.
Well, it's really weird you asked me that today because, I both do so many interviews and get interviewed by so many people that it's not nervous at all. But yesterday, I interviewed Stephen Jenkinson about he wrote a book about dying well, and my mom died 15, 16 months ago, and I was her sole caretaker, and it was impossible. It's humans were not meant to we've heard the cliche of it takes a village to raise a child. It also takes a village to bury an elder or to take care of an elder and to help an elder die or to assist in that process, however. And so the night before that interview, I'd done some preparation, and then I couldn't sleep very much that night. I think it was because it wasn't so much because of the interview as because just that whole process. I mean, A, losing my mom, that, and my mom dying, and then B, the whole process of, for the most part, by myself, helping her through that process was so traumatic so yesterday, and then if we exclude that one, the last time I was really nervous for an interview, oh gosh, it's probably way back in my 90s when I was just a kid. And I'll tell you this, first interview I ever did, Joseph Campbell. Do you know who Joseph Campbell was? No. He wrote the Hero with 1,000 Faces. He was he was a big deal. He wrote a lot about mythology. Anyway, I somehow got an interview with him when I was 22, and fortunately another writer went with me who was way more experienced, because I walked up, I was fine during the, how are you doing? You shake hands, talk to his publicist, talk to him. We all sit down, it's all very nice. I turn on the recorder, and then I couldn't get my first question out. When I eventually got something out, it just made absolutely no sense. And everybody's just staring at me like, who is this idiot that we allowed to interview us? And then fortunately the other writer took it over, and then I was able to recover later. But I was so nervous and scared, and it all turned out fine. And then I think I have one more. Oh yeah, and then one more story that I think is kind of funny is I've been on some pretty big programs. I was a commencement speaker at a college, and that didn't make me nervous. For whatever, actually, I think the reason none of this makes me nervous is because I was a university teacher for 10 years, and getting up in front of an audience that absolutely does not want to be there every night and talking to people who are wishing they were anywhere else but in your class really numb. The reason for this is because I had just had surgery and I was stoned out of my head on Vicodin. So that's why I was talking so slowly. It wasn't because I was being thoughtful. It's because I was trying to emerge from this fog of opiates from the surgery to actually give a coherent answer.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it's a long way of saying I have been nervous for some and very relaxed for others.
Yeah, well, to your point on your mom, I listened to a chat earlier, and my podcast journey started with the death of my brother, which was also it was not so difficult on me as it were on my parents, because they became the caretakers for him, and he had a battle with cancer for about 5 years, and he died at the age of 31, and I was out of the country for a long period, and I came back for his last few months, and so I don't want to speak to you as if I understand what you went through, but I can just say my feelings and my heart and my thoughts go out to you for what you had to go through. I can only imagine that it must have been very difficult. So I just want to put that out there.
Well, thank you. And, you know, honestly, I mean, it doesn't really work to compare miseries, but having said that, I would think, you know, losing my mom was difficult, but I would have to think that your parents losing a child would be even more, because the parents are supposed to die before us. The parents are not supposed to outlive their children.
Yeah, and that's a topic for a different day, for a different time. But my podcast started a little bit out of that, and basically, I'm from South Africa, and one of the challenges I've had as a kid and an adult growing up is I was born in '85, so I was born in the middle of the apartheid, or towards the end of the apartheid regime in South Africa. And then in '94, it became a democracy. And it's weird how officially we are a democracy, but it doesn't really feel like a democracy. And even now in 2020, if you walk around South Africa, it still doesn't really feel like a democracy. And there's still so many parts of racism. And I've tried to come to terms with the way I've been raised, and almost like the educational institutions, the way they've approached education, the way that religion has approached teaching spirituality, but there's always been some weird line of politics involved between all of that, and trying to like almost rid myself. And my podcast has been an opportunity for me to invite people from different backgrounds, different beliefs, and trying to help me to figure out how to be a healthy adult and contribute to this world of us. And my first question, or official question I would like to ask you is, how do you gauge or determine success in certain parts of your life or your life's work or certain projects that you undertake? Because I'm sure that some of the projects that you undertake, there's maybe not a physical aspect where you can see it. It's maybe a little bit more intangible. How do you gauge if you've been successful, or what do you go through mentally to convince yourself that you've been successful?
Well, I think for myself, the primary measure is always the health of the land, and I think that the only measure by which we'll be judged by the humans who come after, presuming there are any, is whether they can breathe the air and drink the water. And I think in addition, this is the only measure, this is the primary measure by which non-humans are judged too. We have this idea that evolution is based on exploiting your surroundings and capturing resources as the best as any capitalist can. But I can show that that's not what evolution's based on in one sentence if you give me a couple semicolons. And that's those creatures who've survived in the long run have survived in the long run, semicolon. The way you survive in the long run is not by hyper-exploiting your surroundings, semicolon. The way you survive in the long run is by actually improving your habitat. I mean, how do we think that the world got to be so wild and fecund and beautiful and full of just extraordinary life before this culture started destroying it? It did that through every creature living and dying and making the world a better place. So, okay, having said that, that I feel very, very strongly about. Having said that, I also have a good friend who she used to run the battered women's program for the state of New York, and before that she ran a battered women's shelter, and more recently she acts as an advocate for women in courts and on domestic violence cases and other cases of violence of men against women. And she's one of the many wonderful things about her is that she will go up to basically every man she sees, and she will ask him, what will it take for men to stop beating on women? And I mean, she's relentless. She gets in a taxi cab and she says it to the taxi cab driver, can you take me to Central Park, please? And by the way, what's it going to take for men to stop beating on women? Do not get on a taxi cab with this woman. She's relentless. So I would not ask her to improve the health of salmon because she's already working really hard to improve things for women. And so while I have this overall metric of are people making the real physical natural world better by their existence, there's also the fact that people need to find what they love and then defend their beloved and to find what it is that, you know, because no matter what it is, it's under assault. And this is just as true. One of the things I mean, this is great. You're doing an hour interview because one of the things that I think is under assault is long form thinking itself. That it went to sound bites and then it went from sound bites down to memes, and it's getting shorter and shorter and more absurd and more absurd. And there are arguments that you can only make and develop through an hour, or in fact through, and he talked about long form music, which just blew my mind because I hadn't thought about that. And then I posted something about that on Facebook. It only took me like 10 seconds to write one sentence, so I could do it. And that was a joke. And other musicians were responding saying, yeah, in some cultures, there are songs that go on for days. And okay, so whatever it is you love, whether it's women not being sexually assaulted, whether it is amphibians, whether it is long-form thinking, it's under assault. Whether it's community democracy, whether it's community self-determination, those are all under assault. And so whatever it is you love, so what's the metric for success on them? It's really hard because that's another thing. I was just talking to a friend of mine, Vince Emanuele, about a week ago, because he is an Iraq, he is a U.S. military veteran who is now against the wars and against U.S. imperialism. And we were talking about how it's true environmentally too, that in general we're losing everywhere. I mean, the world's getting worse every day. And obviously we're losing. So how do we determine our metrics of success? And the metric of success is not, obviously, did we win one victory? Because sometimes environmentalists will pretend there's a victory when they only have 80% of the island cut down instead of 100. And that's not actually a victory. That's 80% a loss. And yeah, it's great that you saved 20% of them, but so I think, I mean, ultimately what I come down to is the metrics are, is the planet in better shape? And if one were primarily interested in intra-human relations, then one would ask, is the, and one can have small victories in the meantime, even amidst the larger loss. I mean, this is true in wars too. You know, you can be losing the war, and if you still win a battle, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Still losing the war. I don't know if that answered any of your question at all.
No, definitely. For me, it's just two questions that I would really love to ask you. One, I consider from listening to you that you're very intelligent. You're well read on so many different things. Is it a burden to to have that much in your head? And is it a lonely place when other people don't always understand and see it?
Well, I am 59, which means that if it was ever a burden, it is becoming less so because I'm forgetting everything I ever remembered. And it's going to happen to you too. This is what happens in your middle age. So,
and just as we cut out previously, you were busy joking with how in your middle age you start forgetting and losing some of your thoughts, and that the same will be happening to me, and then we were cut out. So if we can try to maybe retake it from there.
Okay, well, and there's a more serious point here to be made, which is that had I told the story about the dream of the cranes yet?
No, not yet.
Okay, there's a more serious story to be told here too, about how it seems so often. I faced this in my early 20s a lot, that how so often it would seem that the more you looked around at what was going on, the less happy you were, in that, so many people are just perfectly content to not look around at the absolute apocalypse that is happening in the annihilation of the world, and they just go about their days and say, please, please let this not affect me and my family. And so why would you look at it? And when I was in my early 20s, I faced this question directly and was just asking. And in fact, since I was such a nerd, I at first came up with this notion, that this mathematical equation, that happiness or contentedness equals 1 over awareness, that the more awareness you have, the less happy you're going to be. And that just seemed silly and wrong. So I kept working on it. And then one night I had this dream that blew everything open for me. And in the dream, I was driving along this road, and I stopped and looked at some cranes off to the side. By cranes, I mean herons or storks. I mean birds. I don't mean construction cranes. And they were trying to fly, and then they would land, and it would hurt, and they would crash. They would not fly very well. And I looked over and I said, wow, you don't fly very well. And they said, yeah, we may not fly very well yet, but at least we aren't walking. And the whole thing came clear to me that we have to learn how to fly, and we have to learn how to incorporate whatever new reality that we're in. We have to incorporate reality into our decisions, even if it's painful. And many years later, I was in my 30s, and I'd been an activist, an environmental activist, for about 5 years, and I was just breaking down sobbing 3 times a week. And a lot of my activist friends said, just take some time off, Derrick. The problems to be there when you come back. And I knew that wasn't what I needed to do, because if you're not going to cry about the death of the salmon, what do tears mean? And one day I called up Jeannette Armstrong. She's an Okanagan Indian, a writer and activist, a friend and mentor to me. And I called her up, and I was just sobbing. I said, man, this work's just killing me. It's breaking my heart. And she said, yeah, it'll do that. And I said, the dominant culture hates everything, doesn't it? She said, yeah, it does, even itself. I said, unless it's stopped, it's going to kill everything on the planet, isn't it? She said, yeah, it is, unless it's stopped. And then I said, we're not going to make us some great new glorious tomorrow, are we? And she said the best thing she could possibly say, which is, I've been waiting for you to say that. And the reason that was the best thing she could possibly say is because it normalized my despair. That let me know that despair is an appropriate response to a desperate situation. And it let me know that the pain is just pain, and the sorrow is just sorrow. And it let me know that we spend more energy trying to avoid feeling them than simply feeling them and moving through them and living with them. And it made me understand that I could feel all those things and it wouldn't kill me. But it also made me realize, and this is even better, that I could feel all those things and it would kill me. And that's a wonderful thing, because once you're dead, they can't touch you anymore. So many indigenous people have said to me that the first and most important thing that we have to do is to decolonize our hearts and minds. And what that means is to give up on the self that was created by the dominant culture. And giving up on that self that was created by the dominant culture is not the same thing as dying. It is an identification dying, so that you can switch your allegiance away from the economic system away from the system that is not serving people well and toward the land. And, this is, what do all of the so-called solutions to global warming put forward in the mainstream press? What do they all have in common? What they all have in common is they take industrial capitalism, industrial civilization as the given, and the natural world is having to conform to industrial capitalism, industrial civilization. And that is solving for the wrong variable. That's because they haven't decolonized. That's because their loyalty is still to that system. And that's insane in terms of being out of touch with physical reality, because if you don't have a natural world, you don't have any system whatsoever. The natural world must be primary. And so it's actually quite a good thing to go through that process. It's incredibly painful, and it takes a few years, but it's absolutely necessary. Or it's at least, I don't know if it's necessary, it's absolutely important. And then one more thing, having said that, there are some images. I have a pretty high tolerance for looking at, people have commented that I am able to stare the horrors of this culture and then take them into me and metabolize them and to turn them into, one hopes, gifts for the community through my books. And I recognize that I have a higher tolerance for that than many, but that doesn't alter the fact that there are some things that make me look away too. I will never forget, back in 1999 or 2000 or so, there was this documentary about how humans treat non-humans. And there was, I'm not going to describe it in great detail, just mention it. There were many horrible scenes in there, but there was one that I wish that I had not seen, which was someone in China for the cat fur trade putting a cat in a vat of hot water and skinning it alive. And I wish I had not seen that one. And there are others. So my point in bringing that up is I also understand when some people sometimes have to look away. What I don't understand and I don't forgive is people who spend their entire lives never looking and never attending because they're always too scared. Because here's the thing, a lot of people also say to me, so gosh, Derrick, you do all this work, and don't you ever just feel like quitting because it's very, and the world's getting killed out there. I say that's exactly why I don't feel like quitting, because here's the thing, I have the option to look away, and that cat to whom it was being done did not have the option to look away. Mm-hmm. And as long as I have the privilege of being able to look away, sure, I will look away once in a while just to save my sanity, but they can't, which means I'm not the one in primary pain here. And if they can go through it, I can at least work to stop it. And the same thing is true. I know some friends, female friends, who are tremendous anti-porn activists. And, pornography has never been a part of my life. And the only time I've ever really looked at it was when I wrote about it for Culture Make Believe. And that, honestly, it's so funny. My female anti-porn activist friends sort of laugh at me nicely because I only looked at basically naked women in fields of daisies. And they have shown me some of the torture, the outright torture that is a lot of pornography. And it's like, man, I look at that for 5 seconds, like, I'm sorry, turn the screen off. I can't do it. And Gail Dines has laughed that she'll be doing research on porn for her great anti-porn activism. And her husband will walk by the door and he'll look in the door and she's like, dear, you don't want to see this. Yeah. Anyway, so I understand. And here's another part of this is that, I mean, let's go away from the absolute, grotesqueries of both pornography and skinning cats and talk about I recognize that I have, for whatever reason, I have the capacity to look at this stuff, metabolize it, and then regurgitate it to have it not harm me, to look at most of these. And it hurts, but again, it hurts less than the reality of it. And the point I'm getting at here is a question that some people asked of me, or some questions that somebody gave to me. They didn't ask me these, they gave me these questions to ask other people. And one of them is, what are the largest, most pressing problems that you can help solve using the gifts that are unique to you and all the universe? And, recognizing that I have this gift for being able to look at this stuff and then metabolize into something, I need to use it. And so other people will have different gifts. Oh, well, we'll go on with the other questions. Another question is what do you love, which you've already asked, because it's under assault. And then the third question is, what do you get off on doing? And what I get off on doing is writing, is trying to figure out the relationship between perceived entitlement and exploitation. I love doing that stuff. And, I've condemned myself to a life of homework. And on the other hand, I had a friend that one day I was just calling up, chatting. I was just hanging out, and I said, what are you going to do today? And my friend said, oh, I'm kind of bored, so I'm going to go hand out leaflets protesting Walmart, outside Walmart. I was like, holy crap, I could never do that. That's way too scary for me. I can talk in front of 10,000 people. I can write my books. None of that is scary to me. But like standing outside of Walmart and handing out an individual and talking to a stranger, oh my God, that terrifies me. And so the point is, what can you do? We need it all. We need people acting in various forms of service. And so people ask me all the time, kids like 17, 18 will ask me, so what am I supposed to do now? And I always tell them, what you're supposed to do for the next 5 years is figure out who you are, figure out the answers to those questions, figure out who you are, what you love doing, et cetera, et cetera. Find out what your gifts are. And then it's like Joseph Campbell spent his 20s learning how to write. So when he got to his 30s and had something to write, he would know how to do it. So spend your 20s gathering, and so you can spend your 30s sowing. SOW.
Did you
Maybe
find
SOW
that?
too.
Yeah, but did you find that? Is there a point in life where you're a certain age where these things just becomes a bit naturally easier to process? So, for example, a lot of people tell me during the 30s to 40s, it's quite difficult, but you still have a lot of the hormones from your 20s, and you still have a lot of the passion and enthusiasm, but you're yet to gain the insight and perspective that comes at 40 years old. Did you find that once you reach your 40s, some of these struggles, battles, or projects became easier within yourself?
Absolutely. For me. For a couple reasons. One is, I asked Jeannette Armstrong one time, do you ever question if maybe you're wrong and the culture's right? And she laughed and said, I used to, and I quit because it's been reinforced many times. And it was the same, in my 20s and 30s, I was asking, gosh, maybe my analysis is all wrong. And sure, I can still tweak my analysis, but honestly, this culture is killing the planet. So I don't question on that level. And also another thing that really helped is Jeannette Armstrong again, that one day I called her up and I said, I feel so bad. I feel so horrible because I caused global warming, and I caused global warming by I drive a car, and she said, look, you didn't create car culture. Don't take responsibility for what isn't yours. Don't feel bad because you drive a car. Feel bad because you haven't destroyed car culture itself. And that was huge, that they try to get us to feel guilty for participating in the system when they have made the system all around us. They make us feel guilty for going to the grocery store to buy food when they have killed off the salmon in the streams. And so it's really important. Don't feel guilty for your participation. Instead, destroy the whole system. That helps. So I'm no longer fighting myself that way. That really helped. And another thing, okay, just generically, it's so funny. You know, there's all these movies where the adult gets to go back. You know, they time travel and they travel back and to be 17 years old again. Or I remember my my high school commencement speaker saying, "We will look back on these days as the happiest of our lives." And I remember thinking when she said that, I am in trouble, because I've said this to so many other people. High school is miserable, and the college is just awful, and then the 20s are just a nightmare, and then the 30s are pretty good, and then the 40s are really good, and then about 45 your body starts falling apart. So the 50s kind of stink on a health level, but emotionally it's so much better. Things get so much better. And another way to bring all this is there was some writer, I can't remember who it was. Oh, she wrote the Joy Luck Club. What's her name? Anyway, the author of the Joy Luck Club, Amy Tan. Somebody asked her one time, does writing ever get any easier? And she responded, no, but it gets better. And I read this in my 30s, and I was thinking, oh man, do I really want to be a writer? But for me, that's not true at all. For me, the writing has gotten so much easier. If writing was still as hard as it was in my 20s, I would hate my life. Yeah. But the hard part for me with writing, and this is going to tie back to our lives too, the hard part for me for writing, the hard part is finding the place where it's easy. The hard part is finding that door, and when you open the door, it just flows out. And you know, in my 20s, I think I found that door once when I was 27, and a novel that never got published flowed out. And then it took me years to find that door again. I maybe found it for just a few minutes when I was maybe 30, and a few more minutes when I was 32 and 33. And I spent so much time trying to find that door. And now the door opens up pretty easily. You know, that the door is one way, but the door gives me too much responsibility. A better way to say it is that the relationship with my muse got better and better, and my muse provides more and more. And so, yeah, things do get a lot easier. One more way to put this is I took a standardized test that's called the GRE, Graduate Record Exam, when I was 22 to go to graduate school. And I did okay. I did pretty well. And then I took the test again when I was 28 or 29 because I wanted to go to get an MFA in creative writing. I wanted to go to graduate school again. I hated school so much. I went back to grad school twice. Anyway, the second time I took the test, I thought, oh my gosh, I've gotten so much stupider because I wasn't thinking as hard. And I actually scored much better on the test. And that made me realize too that I wasn't getting stupider, but my thinking was becoming more efficient. And I was actually thinking better. And I think that is true too. I think, so I can say from my own experience that the 20s were hell, and I would not go back. I mean, I wouldn't mind having the body I had when I was 20, but I would not relive the 20s. I would not relive the 20s. And then the 30s were good. The 40s were, first half of the 40s were great. And emotionally, mentally, the 50s have been fantastic. I mean, obviously there's the loss of my mom that put a hard thing in the late 50s, but I mean, I handled that better than I would have in my 20s. In my 20s, I was an emotional mess.
Yeah. And fuck, it's just to absorb everything you say. It's a pleasure, and it will take me a few days to let the washing machine go around in my head to just take in and just process everything. A couple of questions I want to ask you is this awareness of what we are doing to people around us or to the world around us. Is that something, where does nature and nurture come into that? Like, is there something that some of us are born with that makes us capable of perceiving our influence on other things around us? Or is that something that can be taught? Because sometimes I wonder, how can we get other people to join us on certain projects? So for mine, for example, my big project this last 6 years has been to help people from disadvantaged communities into employment. And it's just weird how some people just don't realize what's going on around them. So that's my first question. And the second one is, where do we draw the line between selfishness and evil? Because I see a lot of behavior around me, and I'm like, I know these people are selfish, and I've never really considered that they might be evil. But slowly, as I become older, and I'm still 35, I'm very young, I don't understand the world in completeness. But are there people out there that are evil and consciously making decisions that they know that is really destroying everything? Or is that an extreme case of selfish behavior?
Well, those are fantastic questions. And so far as the first one, in fact, so far as both of them, I have no idea. But so far as the first one, it's a. I think that individuals can change and develop, and can overcome certain impediments that they might have. But I think that there is a lot to be said for character. And I think a couple things. One of them is, one of my favorite stories is when I was like 9 months old. I've been told this by the family. I don't remember. I was a year or something. I was very, very, very young, some sort of toddler. One of my legs started to grow crooked. And so they put a cast on me. And as soon as I would get out of the doctor's office, I would implacably start pounding on this cast. And I wouldn't make a big deal. I wouldn't cry and fuss. I would just take my little fists and beat on it until I broke it. And then they would take me back in and they would do another one, and I would just immediately start beating on it. And, I've spent my entire life, that is the story of my life, that I just implacably beat away at this thing that is constraining us. Never mind that in this case it was a cast that was good for me. Leave that part aside. I just implacably beat at them, and I don't quit. And I'm doing the same thing to this day. I'm implacably just beating upon the dominant culture, trying to wear it away with my little fists. And John Livingston talks about how he thinks that those who love nature, it is simply a state of being. It's not something you can argue someone into. That some people get it and some people don't. Some people love nature and some people don't. And then that I see why you asked those two questions together, because they really are together. And the question of whether people, I'm sorry if I'm misconstruing it here, but the way I ask this question of so many people is, are they stupid or are they evil? And you said them, selfish. It's like,
I call them retarded, and I know it's a really bad word to say, and here in Africa that word you can still use a little bit, and if you use it in the right way, but it basically comes down to, people are just slightly idiotic or extremely idiotic in many cases. And and the worst part is if they ask you, why are we having problems, and you point a mirror at them, then they get angry. And it's like, well,
okay, look, somebody puts in a dam, okay? They build a dam across a river. And then they get surprised that the fish who live in the ocean and who run up the river to spawn, they get surprised that the fish can no longer do that. I'm sorry, are you that stupid? Are you really that stupid that you didn't think through that? Or are you just evil? This is a question I ask myself 50 times a day. And part of my answer is that, okay, I love this, and that's a fairly non-sophisticated analysis. A more sophisticated analysis, Robert J. Lifton wrote about Nazi doctors, and those are doctors in death camps who were participating. They'd taken the Hippocratic Oath, but they're still participating in the death camp. And what he found, yeah, some of them were just sadists. We're going to leave those aside. Those are just evil. Yes, I agree with you. Some people are evil, and some people are born sociopaths, a fairly small percentage, but there are people who are born sociopaths. In capitalism, they are made into the CEO or the president. In many cultures, if you determine that somebody's a sociopath, you just, honestly, you take them out hunting and you don't bring them back. You kill them, or you banish them. Anyway, so there are some people who are born evil, or who are evil. Mengele, well, he's in a different category. But the other Nazi doctors, I thought this analysis is so good. Basically, what he found is that many of these doctors actually cared profoundly for the health of the inmates, of the Jews and other inmates. And they would do whatever they could to help those inmates. They would slip them a scrap of potato. They would hide them from the selection officers who were going to kill them. They would put them to rest for a day so they could get 1 day rest before they go back to the slave labor. They would do all these things, except they wouldn't do the most important thing of all, which is they wouldn't question the existence of the death camp itself. They wouldn't question working them to death. They wouldn't question gassing them to death. They wouldn't question starving them to death. And in fact, if there was a typhus epidemic, they would kill the people who had typhus. They would murder them in order to protect other people from getting typhus. And they did this all so they wouldn't have to question the larger superstructure. So the point is, the larger superstructure of capitalism, the larger superstructure of civilization, the larger superstructure of apartheid makes us stupid and evil.
Yeah.
You see what I'm getting at?
No, definitely. And the system doesn't allow for you to question it. And I don't know, it's weird how, and there's certain key role players that just, they're just really smart. I think there's just some very bad people that are just extremely smart, and they know how to pull strings and get millions of people to follow them.
Well, there's that. And also, there's a great line by Upton Sinclair that it's hard to make a man understand something when his job depends on him not understanding it. So you give people financial rewards for being stupid, and I guarantee you they will be just as stupid as you want them to be. And this, by the way, describes most of our journalism, most of our discourse in general. And here's another thing I just have to add, and I know this makes me sound really cynical, but I think I've deserved it at this point, that honestly, I think the primary use to which humans put their intelligence is rationalizing doing whatever they wanted to do in the first place. I think we spend more time doing that than we do actually figuring out whether the thing should have been done.
And why do you think that is? Is that just, again, is that something that's built into our genetics that just hinders us from really rising above and spiritually taking a look at ourselves and that around us? And I wonder sometimes, because I listen to a lot of American podcasts and I listen to a lot of podcasts from around the world, and I've traveled a fair amount. And I think the one thing that we're lucky with in Africa, or specifically South Africa, the way I was raised, is that you raised in sync with nature. So going to the ocean, going to the mountains, just doing activities in forests. And I say that I think what makes me humble is that as soon as I leave my house, there are a million creatures, not a million, but there are quite a few creatures that can kill me. And that just really puts me into perspective of where I am in the pecking order. Because if a cobra bites me, if a puff adder bites me, if I find myself between 40 baboons, that's not a great place to be at if you do something by accident. If I go surf and there's a shark, like there's nothing I can do at that moment if that creature really decides to do anything. And it's amazing that 99 million times out of a billion, they don't want to get involved with you and they don't really care about you. But the fact that you can get hurt by leaving your house really makes you understand the world. And I think it provides some sense of humility. And I wonder sometimes if people grow up in these big cities where the most exotic thing is a mosquito, that they maybe lose a sense of perspective of the world.
Well, there's that. And there's also John Livingston talks about how, yes, I completely agree with you. And also I agree with you that we think they're scary, but they're not. And I see bears every single day here, literally every single day. And people are like, oh my gosh, aren't you so scared to walk through the forest with bears? Like, no. I mean, either they will sit there and look at me, or they'll run away, or they won't do anything. And we have been lied to by nature programs that make us think that animals spend all their time killing, and they don't. And they spend most of their time, I see bears lying out there scratching their bellies and sleeping, and that's what they spend, and staring into space and thinking bear thoughts. That's what they do. Mm. Anyway, so one of the things John Livingston talked about is how is that most of us I perceive cities as places of sensory overload. And that's true. When I go to a city, it drives me crazy because there's so many people, so much noise. But it's not actually that it's sensory overload. John Livingston talks about how it's actually sensory deprivation. Because when you go out in the wild, think about this right now, and I want your listeners to think about this right now. Think about what percentage of your perceptions come directly from non-humans, and what percentage of your perceptions right now are mediated by or created by humans. And chances are almost all of them are mediated by or created by humans. That's all we see, all we hear. And if you're in a sensory deprivation tank, if you're only in an echo chamber where everything comes from one source, which is humans, then you start to hallucinate. And he believed, and I agree with this, that most of our ideologies are hallucinations. And that sounds really fancy, but another way to think about it is, if all of your perceptions are created by or mediated by humans, you can come to believe that humans are the only ones who matter. And you can come to believe that the stock market is important, but the health of the forest isn't. Because the health of the forest, you don't see it every day. It's not there every day. It's not in your lungs. I made a really important realization the other day, that when I would go on tour and then I would come back, I would park at my mom's house, and then I would walk to my house. It's 3/8 of a mile. And every time when I got about 2/3 of the way to my house, so maybe a quarter of a mile through the forest, I would suddenly feel like I was home. And for many years, for 20 years of doing that, I always thought it was because of just a certain vision that was so pretty. When I come around a certain corner in the path, it's just beautiful to see these trees, whatever. But I was talking to somebody, I was interviewing somebody about how marijuana works. And you take it you smoke it, and then it goes into your lungs, and then it goes into your bloodstream, and then it crosses your blood-brain barrier. And that takes just a little while. And it suddenly occurred to me that no, it's not the vision. But when I get home from tour and I walk into the forest, it takes that long for the forest to literally enter my body. And that's when I feel home. As soon as it has come in through my mouth and nose, entered my lungs, gone into my bloodstream, and crossed the blood-brain barrier, I'm here.
That's amazing. I love that.
Well, thanks. Yeah, this has been a great interview, but can you ask a real quick wind down? Because I have to go, because I got to do something at 2:15.
Yeah, definitely. I wanted to. It's a bit of a question and a slash comment, but I got in. I saw this guy Neil deGrasse Tyson a few years ago, and I've listened to a few of his podcasts. And initially, I really liked him, and then I realized, but he's never been asked a question where he says, "I don't know." He always has an answer, and you've done it now in this conversation, and I've seen it on a few other conversations. I just want to say I love the fact that you sometimes are presented with questions and you actually say, I don't know. And I think that's a great sign to judge a person by, if they can acknowledge that. And my last question is, has there ever been something that you really believed and you were later in life proven something opposite or slightly different, where you had to reevaluate or change your mind and acknowledge that maybe your previous belief was needed upgrading?
Oh, all the time. Oh, and I want to mention a famous person who did this, and I have so much respect for it. Lewis Mumford, I think he's the most important philosopher of the 20th century. Anyway, he was really pro-technology in the 1920s and 30s, and then World War II came along, and he's like, we need to rethink it. And he already had a public career, and he switched around. So that's great. So yes, I have changed. I was raised a Seventh-day Adventist, and I was a very strong Christian. Also, this is so funny. In 9th grade, so that's when I was 15 or something, we're supposed to write an essay about America, and I wrote this essay about how we should nuke all the commies. And so I've changed a little bit on that. And then later, John Livingston again, he introduced me to the idea of evolution as being based on cooperation, not competition. And I remember reading this thing somewhere saying it takes you 10 years to change your mind. And that is so true. This is why I don't argue with people for the most part. I'll present my case, and then if they disagree, I'll just drop it, because arguments aren't really how people change their mind. They're very rarely in my life has there been this sort of, you're having sort of a fencing match with like, I got you there, you got me there. Oh, that's a great point. Oh, everything's different. That's not how it works for me. The way it works is a friend of mine will tell me some idea. I say, no, that's not how it works. And then I go back and I think about it. And about a year and a half or 2 years later, I say to my friend, hey, I had this great idea. And then I say the same thing back to them that they said to me. They're like, yeah, Derek, I told you that 2 years ago. And for me, that's how minds change, is with sort of slowly, with no recognition that they have. And a great example of that is John Livingston, that he was the one who introduced me to the notion that evolution is based on cooperation. When I first read that, I'm thinking, this is crazy. Everybody knows evolution is based on competition. And then 3 or 4 years later, I could no longer conceptualize the notion that evolution is based solely on competition. I can see some forms of competition, yeah, limited, but the larger overall driver has to be the health of the land base. And even, it's so interesting, reading some of Richard Dawkins' thought experiments, understanding that evolution is based on cooperation, it's like there are places where even he goes right up to the edge, but then his ideology has to bring him back. And that's a whole longer discussion for another time. But yes, there have been many times where I have, and this has happened too publicly sometimes, where somebody will say, this isn't actually right. And of course, in the moment, I get really defensive. Yes, of course it's right. And then like 4 months later, 6 months later, a year later, it's like, well, maybe that's not right. So yeah, it does happen. And it's not going to happen when this culture is killing the planet, because of course it's killing the planet.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the evidence there. But on certain other issues, yes, it certainly has happened. Mm-hmm. Oh, God, I know a great example. For years, I told this joke that when people I would be at a talk, and I would say, how many people here have my book, A Language Older Than Words? And, a third of the people, whatever, raise your hand. I say, okay, how many of you also own a straight razor? They're like, oh, I don't know what he's doing. You're going out of here. I say, okay, what I want you to do, I want you to take the chapter it's called Violence Revisited, I want you to cut it out. I'm going to roll it up and throw it away. Because in that chapter, I say things like, if you use violence, you run the risk of becoming like they are. And that's crazy. That's crazy. Does a woman who is having a man attempt to rape her, if she kills him, does she become a rapist? This is nonsense. There were some tigers killed a zookeeper somewhere. And it's like, did they run the risk of becoming a zookeeper? Yeah. It's complete nonsense. But I don't know how. It was embarrassing that I ever wrote that. So yeah, it happened.
I love that you can say it. That's fantastic. I really enjoy that trait if people have it. Mr. Derrick, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you. It's been a massive privilege, and I'm super excited, and I can't wait for my mind just to process everything that we've just spoken about. Thank you so much.
Oh, well, thank you. Let's do it again.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your Wednesday.
Yeah, you too. Have a great day.